it's really important to use a wormer that you know works, not just to maximise performance, but as I said, it also reduces the worm challenge on pasture and it slows the development of resistance. So it's a win-win all round.
Hello and welcome to the Beef Edge, the Teagasc Beef Podcast, for all your latest news, information and advice for Irish beef farmers. I'm Catherine Egan and I'm joined by Teagasc Researcher Orla Keane to discuss parasite control and Anthelmintic Resistance. Orla, you're very welcome. This is a good time of year to sit down and review the herd health plan for the year gone by and the year ahead on farms, and it's often something that's overlooked.
With all things related to health, human health, animal health, we all know that prevention is better than cure. So it's really important to have a herd health plan, to develop one with your vet, and then to kind of review it on a regular basis and make sure that it's working for you. It'll cover a variety of disease prevention methods like vaccination protocols and biosecurity, but also look at, what are the animal health risks on the farm, how you're monitoring for them or identifying which diseases pose a risk to animal health or productivity and how to prevent those diseases or manage them. So yeah, it's a key part of managing animal health.
And as cattle are started to be turned out, the question arises, should cattle be dosed at turnout, or what's your thoughts?
So I suppose when we're considering dosing, there's probably two major parasites we're thinking about. The first one is the worms, the likes of the stomach worms or lungworm. And then the second one is the fluke. And I suppose, it can be a little bit different for the two. I suppose what I would generally think is that I would be dosing at housing. What you want to do is you want to eliminate these parasites when cattle are housed. That will maximize productivity over the winter, over the housing period, and it also helps prevent them shedding parasites onto the pasture when they're turned out in the spring. However, if they haven't been dosed at housing and they are shedding parasites, then absolutely I would be dosing at turnout to make sure that when those cattle go out, they're not shedding parasites onto the pasture.
And there was a significant issue with liver fluke incidents last autumn, and farmers spoke with their vets and decided on a treatment protocol if it was needed. For farmers that did dose for liver fluke and cattle are housed now for over 12 weeks, what would you advise to do to check if that treatment protocol worked?
Data from the Beef Health Check programme had indicated there for a number of years, since about 2018, that the incidence of fluke was decreasing year on year. However, in the last year or so, it has seemed to gone back up again. So it is a good time to take stock of the risk of fluke on the farm. Is there a risk? And if so, how are you managing it? So some farmers will have treated. Now, fluke is a parasite that takes about 12 weeks, 10 to 12 weeks of age to reach maturity. So it's only these adult fluke that will lay eggs. So it's only these adult fluke that a fecal egg count will pick up. So if cattle have been housed for 12 weeks, a fecal egg count now will say if they're shedding fluke eggs or not. Because there are different drugs, even if they were treated at housing, there are different wormers on the market, and they target different stages of fluke. So some of them target the early immature fluke, some of them target the immature fluke, and some of them target the adult fluke. So it's really important, if you are treating at housing, that you make sure you're using the right fluicide for the right stage of fluke that the cattle have at that point. So a check before cattle are turned out can be a good way to check that you're not turning out cattle that are going to shed fluke eggs onto your pasture and perpetuate that parasite life cycle.
And farmers are hearing a lot about Anthelmintic Resistance, Orla. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, so there's probably a couple of reasons, Catherine. So one of the reasons is resistance seems to be on the rise. And everyone's probably hearing a lot about AMR or antimicrobial resistance. And in a lot of cases there, what they're talking about is bacterial resistance to antibiotics. However, there's also APR or anti-parasitic resistance, and that's a huge threat to animal health. We have a grass-based production system. We know that some of the parasites out there, whether it be the gutworms, lungworm, flukes, we know that these are a major threat to animal health, and that we're quite reliant on the drugs that we use to control these parasites. So if the parasites develop the ability to resist that drug, then it offers a major threat. In terms of fluke, we know that there is resistance to triclobendazole out there. So that's the only fluticide that targets the early immature fluke. And we know for some of the other flukicides, there's been resistance reported in other countries. So of course, it could happen here too. If we look at the stomach worms, then we know that resistance is quite widespread. There are 3 classes of wormers for stomach worms. You've got the benzimidazoles or white wormers, levamisoles are yellow wormers, and ivermectin type drugs are clear wormers. And we have now seen resistance to all 3 of those drugs on cattle farms in Ireland. So I suppose it's quite a topical issue at the moment.
And in relation to different changes that's coming in, you've mentioned there the antimicrobial resistance, like farmers have seen the changes that has been made at veterinary level. There are also possible changes coming with the Anthelmintic resistance also.
Yeah, so that anthelminthics or wormers are due to go on veterinary prescription later that year, which means that that you will have to have a prescription from a veterinary practitioner to buy these products in the future.
Based on all the things you mentioned there, Orla, you're involved with establishing the Managing Anthelmintic Resistance in Cattle Sustainability project, also known as the MARCS project. What is that about?
Yeah, so the MARCS project is a new project that has recently commenced, and it's got a couple of aims. So one of them is to establish what is the level of resistance to the different wormers on Irish cattle farms. So that's related to stomach worms. So, as I said, we've seen some resistance out there. So how widespread is that resistance to the different drugs? To identify what are the risk factors for the development of resistance, and then what are the barriers to mitigating these risks, and then to develop and validate protocols for cattle that will allow us to check for wormer treatment efficacy using pooled fecal samples.
And who can participate in this project, Orla?
So the project is open to cattle farmers throughout the island of Ireland who want to check their wormer efficacy. So any of them can take part. In order to take part, they will need to collect and submit fecal samples to the Teagasc Parasitology lab. So, there is a bit of work involved on their behalf. They can test whatever product they want. So if there's a particular product they want to know if it works, they can test that product. But I suppose one thing to bear in mind is that it'll have to be in an oral or an injectable form, not in a pour-on form.
And for farmers that are listening, why should they get involved in this project? What's the benefit to them?
Well, the definitive test for resistance is known as the fecal egg count reduction test, and it's a very expensive test to carry out. So as part of this project, if farmers participate, they will get this test done to the highest diagnostic standards, carried out for free. And as I said, this is a very expensive test to get done. And that'll give them information on which wormers are effective on their farm. And using an effective wormer is key to maximizing animal performance, reducing the number of parasites on pasture that can infect other animals, and to slowing the development of resistance. So there's a lot of useful information out there, and it will also help vets in terms of knowing which anthelminthics to prescribe if they have information on which anthelminthics are working on the farm.
And for farmers that's listening that are interested, how can they get involved?
There is a sign-up page on the Teagasc website. So if you just do a Google search or an internet search for Teagasc and MARCS, so that's MARCS, it should come up. And that has a sign-up page where farmers can input their details. That will come through to us here in Grange, and then we will be in touch with what is needed for the project. So in terms of the fecal sample collection, what's needed.
And this is really building, Orla, on the previous research that you've already carried out.
Yeah, so there was a small-scale study we did a number of years ago looking specifically on dairy beef farms for anthelmintic resistance. We tested quite a small number of farms, but we did find resistance to the 3 classes of wormers that are out there, that yellow, white and clear classes. So that was quite worrying. But obviously we need to get more data to determine the extent of it on a national level.
And based on the research that's been carried out for this project, Orla, how many farmers will be accepted? And does the beef system that the farmers operate in, does that matter?
So in terms of how many farmers will be accepted, we're aiming to process as many samples as possible. There is, a detailed protocol involved in terms of the sample collection. So as I said, if farmers sign up, they'll get the information on how to collect the samples. And at that point, they can make a decision whether to participate or not, because it is important that they follow the protocol. Obviously, in order to get good diagnostic test results, we have to have good samples submitted. But at this point, we haven't put a limit on the number of farmers. We're hoping to be able to process all of the samples that we get. In terms of the beef system, then it's open to all beef systems because we want to get information on, the level of resistance in the different cattle farming systems throughout Ireland. However, in order to carry out the test, there needs to be enough parasites to check whether the drug is working. So there's 2 steps. The first one will be to monitor the animals to check when the worm burden becomes high enough to do the test. And then the second step is to do the test. So there may be certain systems, if they're very extensive systems and systems that have primarily older animals, for example, their worm burden may never really get high enough to do the test. However, in those cases, if the worm burden doesn't get high enough to do the test, then they also don't need the wormer.
And then based on the protocol, how should the fecal samples be taken and when would be the best time to take them for the farm?
Yeah, so there's, as I said, like if people sign up, they'll get the sample, the detailed sample collection protocol will be sent to them. So the first step will be to monitor the fecal egg count and that'll be based on pooled samples and there will be instructions provided on how to properly collect a pooled sample. That will give an indication of when the worm burden starts to rise, because obviously if we're checking if the parasites are resistant, we need to have parasites present. And then the second will be to do the test. So that will be carried out then whenever the worm burden is high enough. So that may be a different time on different farms, and it will be decided based on the monitoring samples. In that case, what will need to be collected is individual animal samples matched to the animal ID, pre and post treatment with the drug.
And this will be really an effective way for farmers to figure out, is the protocol that they're using and product working on their farm?
Absolutely, yes. As I said, this will be done to the diagnostic standards of the World Association for the Advancement of Veterinary Parasitology. It's not a quick or a cheap test to perform. So there's really valuable diagnostic information that will allow farmers to evaluate their worm control. Is it working? Are they getting the best worm control and maximising performance?
And as you mentioned, the farmer and the vet can use the results from this to proceed with the animal health plan going forward.
Yeah, I think it's really a key piece of information for an animal health plan. It's really important to use a wormer that works, not just to maximise performance, as I mentioned earlier, but as I said, it also reduces the worm challenge on pasture and it slows the development of resistance. So it's a win-win all round.
That's great, Orla. Thanks very much. And I'll include the link in the podcast text for anyone that's interested in signing up to take the free samples. Thanks very much, Orla.
Thanks, Catherine.
That's all for this week's episode, and you can catch up on all other shows and interviews from the Beef Edge podcast on the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie, or you can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe so you never miss a show. For all other updates from our beef programme, keep an eye on our Twitter and Facebook pages. Until next time, I'm Catherine Egan and thanks for listening.